He looked at her name tag, then at her scuffed shoes, and smirked. To Christian L. Baron, the black waitress standing before him wasn't a person. She was a backdrop to his theater of superiority. He thought that by ordering in an archaic, 700-year-old Provençal dialect, a language so dead even scholars struggled with it, he could strip her of her dignity in front of his fiancée, Tracy. He thought he was untouchable. He was mistaken. He didn't know that the woman balancing his wine glass wasn't just a waitress. And the words she was about to speak would not only silence the dining room, but shatter his empire. This is the story of how arrogance drowned in its own poison. What Christian L. Baron did next, the accusation he hurled, the lie he weaponized, almost destroyed an innocent woman's life. It almost killed her father. And if you scroll past the story, if you let this moment disappear into the algorithm, you're choosing to let men like Christian win in silence. Judith J. Higgins deserves to have her voice heard. She deserves witnesses. Subscribe and follow for part 2, not because it's entertaining, but because some stories demand you choose a side. And right now, by staying or leaving, you're choosing. This is what happened before the world almost forgot her name. The air inside the Rothwell Lounge, Manhattan's most exclusive dining room, smelled of aged Bordeaux, saffron risotto, and inherited wealth. For Judith J. Higgins, however, it mostly smelled of desperation. Judith tugged at the collar of her crisp white shirt, which was too tight across her shoulders because she'd bought it a year ago when she still believed this job would be temporary. It was 8:47 p.m. on a Thursday. The evening service was reaching its crescendo, a symphony of baccarat crystal chiming against Limoges china, punctuated by laughter that cost more per syllable than Judith earned in a shift. Table 3 needs their Chateaubriand carved tableside. Table 5 is complaining that the truffle shavings are too thin. Move, Higgins, move. The voice belonged to Victor Thorne, the floor manager, a man who believed that hesitation was a cardinal sin. He was currently stationed near the sommelier station, scrutinizing the wine list as though it contained nuclear launch codes. Right away, Victor, Judith said, keeping her voice steady. She lifted a tray of champagne flutes, ignoring the burning ache that radiated from her heels to her lower back. She had been standing for 11 hours. Her shoes, polyurethane knockoffs from a discount store in Brooklyn, were splitting at the seams. The right sole had separated just enough to let in moisture every time she crossed the kitchen's perpetually damp floor. Judith J. Higgins was 28 years old. To the patrons of the Rothwell Lounge, she was invisible architecture. She was the hand that poured the Margot, the voice that murmured the evening specials, the body that absorbed their condescension without flinching. They didn't notice the small scar on her left temple from where she'd fainted from exhaustion 2 months ago and hit the corner of a prep table. They certainly didn't know that 2 years ago, Judith had been a doctoral candidate in comparative linguistics at the Sorbonne, one of 3 candidates selected for the prestigious Maison de la Recherche Fellowship, until the international call came at 4 a.m. Paris time. Her father's stroke, the paralysis that claimed his left side, the medical debt that consumed her fellowship stipend, her savings, and finally, her future. Now she wore a bow tie and answered 2 myths from men who'd never read a book they didn't skim for investment tips. She approached table 7 with the practiced smile she'd perfected, warm enough to seem genuine, distant enough to remain forgettable. Christian L. Baron was already performing for his audience. Christian L. Baron didn't walk into the Rothwell Lounge. He invaded it. Judith saw him before she heard him, a deliberate entrance timed to coincide with the lull between the 7th and 8th courses at table 2. The mahogany doors swung open with theatrical precision, and there he was, 6'2" of calculated menace wrapped in a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than Judith's father's monthly medical bills. His platinum cufflinks caught the chandelier light like tiny warnings. But it was the tattoos that stopped conversation at 3 nearby tables. Serpentine black ink coiled up from beneath his collar, disappearing into his hairline, the unmistakable mark of the Baron Syndicate. In any other establishment, he would have been escorted out. Here, at the Rothwell, his reservation had been confirmed by someone powerful enough to override the dress code. That alone made Judith's stomach clench. Behind him, Tracy A. Smith floated in like an apology. She wore a cream silk gown that whispered money so old it had forgotten its own origins. Her diamond tennis bracelet, Judith counted 18 stones while pouring water at table 4, could have funded her father's rehabilitation for 2 years. Maybe 3. Victor materialized at Judith's elbow, his cologne overwhelming the delicate scent of the white truffle oil being drizzled at table 9. Table 7, he hissed. Barren party. Do not make eye contact unless spoken to. Do not offer recommendations. Answer only direct questions. Understood? Judith nodded, her throat suddenly dry. She'd heard the stories, every server had. Christian L. Barron owned half the nightlife in Lower Manhattan, and the other half paid him protection to stay open. He collected people's dignity, the way some men collected watches. She approached table 7 carrying 2 leather-bound menus, her splitting shoes suddenly feeling like they might disintegrate entirely. Christian was already seated, legs spread in that particular masculine sprawl that claimed twice the space his body required. Tracy perched beside him, her posture so correct it looked painful. "Good evening," Judith began, her voice steady despite the warning bells clanging in her skull. "Welcome to water," Christian interrupted, not looking up from his phone. "Sparkling. European. If you bring me anything from a domestic source, we're going to have a problem." Tracy's hand fluttered to her pearl necklace. "Christian, maybe we should." "Pellegrino," Judith said quickly. "Of course." She turned to leave, but his voice caught her like a fishhook. "Wait." Judith froze, turned back, met his eyes for the first time. They were the color of brushed steel, and just as warm. Christian tilted his head, studying her the way a cat studies a bird with a broken wing. His gaze traveled from her name tag to her shoes, lingering there, at the split sole, at the visible cardboard she'd shoved inside to create a false bottom. Then he smiled. It was the kind of smile that had preceded 1,000 cruelties. Judith had seen it before, on different faces in different contexts, but always with the same underlying message. "I see your weakness, and I'm going to exploit it." "Judith," he said, pronouncing each syllable like he was testing the weight of her name. "That's biblical. Old Testament. Do you know what it means?" Every instinct screamed at her to lie, to play stupid, to give him nothing. But Victor was watching from the sommelier station, and hesitation was a cardinal sin. "It means woman of Judea," Judith said quietly. "Or praised." Christian's smile widened. Something predatory flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Or hunger. "Smart girl," he murmured. Then louder, to Tracy. "See, baby? I told you they hire quality here. Even the help knows their etymology." Even the help. The words landed like a slap. Tracy looked away, her cheeks flushing pink. 2 businessmen at table 6 shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Christian leaned back in his chair, his tattooed neck flexing as he studied the menu with exaggerated concentration. When he spoke again, his voice carried across the dining room, loud enough that the pianist actually missed a note. "Tell me, Judith," he said, still not looking at her. "How's your Provençal?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Judith's heart stopped, then started again, hammering against her ribs hard enough to hurt. Around the dining room, she felt rather than saw the subtle shifts, heads turning, conversations pausing, the collective held breath of people who sensed blood in the water. Christian finally looked up, his steel eyes gleaming with malicious anticipation. And Judith understood. This wasn't about ordering dinner. This was an execution. The silence that followed Christian's question was absolute. Even the kitchen noise seemed to retreat. No more clattering of copper pots, no more barked orders from the line cooks. The entire Rothwell lounge held its breath, waiting for the black waitress in the splitting shoes to crumble under the weight of a dead language. Judith's fingers tightened around her order pad. She could feel Victor's glare burning into her back from across the room. "Do not engage. Do not challenge. Survive the shift." But Christian wasn't done. He set down his menu with deliberate slowness, the sound of leather against marble echoing like a gavel. Then he began to speak, his voice dripping with theatrical precision. Voli una dozzina di ostre de Britannia, amb lo vin blanc pus car que tenets. Old Provençal, the linguistic corpse of southern France, dead for 7 centuries. He wanted a dozen Brittany oysters with the most expensive white wine they had. But he'd structured the sentence to show off, used an archaic possessive form that even most Romance language scholars would stumble over. He was performing, and Judith was the unwilling audience to her own humiliation. Tracy touched his arm. Christian, I don't think. Sure. He didn't look at his fiancée. His eyes were locked on Judith, waiting. Hunting. I'm testing the service quality here. Surely a fine establishment like this ensures their staff can accommodate all their clientele's needs. Around them, the dining room had transformed into a Roman Colosseum. A woman at table 3, dripping in Cartier, leaned forward, her fork suspended midair. The 2 hedge fund managers at table 6 exchanged glances. Even the sommelier had stopped pretending to arrange wine bottles. They all wanted to see her fail. Judith felt the familiar weight settling over her chest, that suffocating blanket of invisibility that came with being underestimated. How many times had she absorbed this exact brand of cruelty? How many small deaths had she died in this uniform, swallowing her intelligence to protect her father's medical fund? Christian's smile grew wider. Nothing? No response. He turned to Tracy with exaggerated disappointment. And here I thought the Rothwell trained their people properly. Something inside Judith cracked. Not broke, cracked. Like ice under pressure, the fractures spreading in dangerous, irreversible patterns. She thought of her father, paralyzed in a rehabilitation center in Queens, unable to speak her name but squeezing her hand 3 times when she visited. I love you. She thought of her dissertation defense at the Sorbonne, the one she'd delivered in 3 languages to a standing ovation she'd never hear again. She thought of the fellowship letter, still folded in her wallet like a funeral program for her future. And she thought, not today. De Cordy, Center, Judith said quietly. The words fell into the silence, like stones into still water. Christian's smile faltered. Just barely. Just enough. Judith continued, her voice gaining strength, the old Provençal flowing from her lips with the same fluency she'd once used to debate Occitan poetry in seminar rooms overlooking the Seine. Mas cal dire que vostre langage a una error grammatical. Lo vin blanc pus car, yes incorrect dins aquest context. Durats dire lo pus car vin blanc, esse volits utilisser la syntaxi aristocratica del segle XIII. But I must tell you that your phrasing has a grammatical error. Lo vin blanc pus car is incorrect in this context. You should say, lo pus car vin blanc if you want to use the aristocratic syntax of the 13th century. The dining room didn't just go silent. It went airless. Christian's face drained of color so fast it was almost comical. His jaw clenched, the tattoos on his neck seeming to writhe with barely contained rage. Tracy's hand flew to her mouth. But Judith wasn't finished. 2 years of swallowed words, 2 years of yes, sir, and right away came flooding out in perfect, cutting Parisian French. Monsieur Baron, as I vous souhaite impressionner votre fiancé avec de longues morts, j'ai segra respectueusement que vous laisse prenis d'abord correctement. La grammaire compte, meme dans la cruout. Mr. Baron, if you wish to impress your fiancé with dead languages, I respectfully suggest you learn them correctly first. Grammar matters, even in cruelty. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then Christian pushed back from the table so violently his chair screeched against the marble floor. He stood, his full height suddenly menacing, his steel eyes blazing with something far more dangerous than embarrassment. Rage. You, his voice was barely controlled, shaking with fury. You just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic little life. Victor was already rushing over, his face pale with panic. The sommelier had dropped a wine bottle. Judith heard it shatter somewhere behind her. Tracy was tugging at Christian's sleeve, whispering urgently, but he shook her off like a fly. Christian leaned across the table, close enough that Judith could smell his cologne, sandalwood and violence. I'm going to destroy you, he whispered, loud enough for only Judith to hear. Not just your job. Everything. Do you understand me? Everything. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, and his face changed. The rage drained away, replaced by something infinitely more terrifying. Calculation. His hand emerged empty. He patted his other pockets, jacket, pants, inside breast pocket. Each motion more frantic than the last. Then he looked at Judith, and she saw exactly what was about to happen a split second before he opened his mouth. My wallet, Christian said, his voice suddenly loud, suddenly theatrical again. My platinum card. It was right here in my jacket. He turned to face the dining room, a man performing for an audience that had never stopped watching. Someone, he said slowly, deliberately, his eyes locked on Judith's face, has stolen from me. For 3 seconds, Judith J. Higgins stood perfectly still. In those 3 seconds, she made a calculation that would either save her or destroy her. Christian L. Barron had just ordered oysters in a dialect so obscure that most medieval scholars couldn't parse it without footnotes. He'd done it to humiliate her, to watch her stammer and fumble while Tracy looked on, and the entire dining room bore witness to her inadequacy. He'd chosen the wrong weapon. Voli sis oster de bellin, coquas crudas, coquas gratinadas amb untak de badial hoster, Judith repeated, her voice clear and steady. Then, without breaking eye contact, she switched to flawless Old Provençal, the academic reconstruction, not the bastardized tourist version. Esi platsavas, sena, voli dire que l'Occident ancien que parlets es plein d'erreurs. And if it pleases you, sir, I must tell you that the archaic Occident you're speaking is full of mistakes. The dining room went silent. Not the polite hush of refined conversation pausing. This was the shocked silence of a bomb detonating in slow motion. The pianist's hands hovered above the keys. A waiter near table 4 actually dropped a fork, and it clattered against Limoges china like a gunshot. Christian's face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed. Tracy's hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide with something that looked dangerously close to vindication. But Judith wasn't finished. She switched to aristocratic Parisian French, the kind spoken in the 8th arrondissement, the kind that carried the weight of old money and older institutions. Her voice was no longer the apologetic murmur of a waitress. It was the voice that had defended her dissertation in front of a panel of the most ruthless linguists in Europe. Monsieur, vous avez utilisé la forme grammatical du 15e siècle, mais votre syntaxe appartient au dialecte Rhodanien, pas au Provençal maritime. C'est comme commander un Chateau Margaux mais demander qu'on le serve dans un verre à eau. Sir, you use the grammatical form from the 15th century, but your syntax belongs to the Rhodanian dialect, not maritime Provençal. It's like ordering a Chateau Margaux but asking for it to be served in a water glass. A sound erupted from table 9. Someone had choked on their wine. Christian's jaw clenched, so tight Judith could see the muscle jumping beneath his tattooed neck. His steel eyes had gone black, pupils blown wide with a rage so pure it was almost tangible. His hands, which had been casually draped across the white tablecloth, were now gripping the edge of the table hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. You, he started, his voice shaking. Your oysters, Judith continued in English, her tone professionally neutral as though she hadn't just linguistically dismembered him in front of 50 witnesses. 6 bellin. 3 raw, 3 gratinade with garlic butter. I'll have those prepared for you immediately. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to continue the conversation in Provençal? I also speak the Mistralian standardization if you prefer something more modern. Tracy made a sound, half laugh, half gasp, then immediately covered her mouth with her hand. But her eyes were shining. She was looking at Judith the way someone looks at a superhero pulling off a mask. Victor was frozen by the sommelier station, his face a war zone of shock and panic. He clearly wanted to intervene but had no idea how to navigate what was happening. Christian stood up, so violently his chair scraped backward with a shriek. He was trembling, actually trembling. For a man who'd built an empire on intimidation, who'd crushed competitors with a phone call and ruined lives with a signature, This public humiliation was a nuclear strike to his identity. "Do you know who I am?" His voice was low, dangerous, the kind of quiet that preceded violence. "Yes, sir," Judith said, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "I believe you're the gentleman who'd like 6 bellin oysters." A vein pulsed in Christian's temple. Tracy had gone very still, her earlier amusement evaporating as she recognized the shift in Christian's body language. This was no longer embarrassment. This was fury looking for a target. Christian's hand moved to his inner jacket pocket. For one terrible moment, Judith thought, irrationally, impossibly, that he was reaching for a weapon. But what he pulled out was worse. His Platinum American Express card. He placed it on the table with the deliberate precision of someone laying down a guillotine blade, then leaned forward until his face was inches from Judith's. "Take this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Charge whatever you want to it. Go shopping. Buy yourself some shoes that don't look like you fished them out of a dumpster." Judith's face burned. This was the retaliation. Financial humiliation dressed up as generosity, designed to reduce her brilliant linguistic display to the desperate act of a poor woman looking for a handout. "Sir, I can't accept. I insist." His smile was a slash across his face. "Consider it a tip. For the educational experience." Tracy touched his arm. "Christian, let's just
take the
card." Each word was a hammer strike. Judith's hand trembled as she reached for it. The card was warm from being in his jacket, and as her fingers closed around it, she saw the glint of satisfaction in Christian's eyes. He thought he'd won. Thought he'd turned her moment of triumph into another humiliation. She slipped the card into her apron pocket, her face carefully neutral. "I'll return this after I've processed your order, sir." "No rush," Christian said, settling back into his chair with the casual arrogance of a man who'd just re-established dominance. "Keep it as long as you need. I trust you." The words dripped with venom. Judith turned to leave, her legs somehow still functioning despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She'd made it 3 steps when Christian's voice stopped her one more time. "Oh, and Judith?" He paused, savoring the moment. "When you bring my oysters, let's discuss your father's medical situation. I hear Northwestern Memorial is quite expensive. Maybe we can work something out. I'm very generous with people who know their place." The room tilted. He knew. Somehow Christian L. Barron knew about her father. About the debt. About the one thing in the world that could be weaponized against her. And as Judith walked toward the kitchen on legs that no longer felt like her own, she realized with crystalline, terrifying clarity. This wasn't over. This was just beginning. Judith made it to the kitchen before her hands started shaking. She leaned against the stainless steel prep counter, Christian's platinum card burning like a coal in her apron pocket. Around her, the kitchen operated at its usual controlled chaos. Orders barking, pans clattering, the head chef screaming about a risotto that had gone too soft. But all Judith could hear was Christian's voice echoing in her skull. "Let's discuss your father's medical situation." How did he know? She had 12 minutes before the oysters were ready. 12 minutes to pull herself together, to figure out how a mobster she'd never met knew the most vulnerable detail of her life. "Higgins." Victor appeared beside her, his face flushed. "What the hell was that out there?" "He ordered in Provençal," Judith said quietly. I responded appropriately. "Appropriately?" Victor's voice cracked. "You just humiliated a man who owns half of Lower Manhattan. Do you have any idea what he could?" "6 bellin," the sous chef called out, sliding a pristine white plate across the pass. 3 raw, 3 gratinade. Judith reached for the plate with steady hands she didn't feel. The oysters glistened under the kitchen lights, arranged like jewels. She could walk back out there.
Serve them.
Pretend the last 10 minutes hadn't happened. Or she could run. The thought came suddenly, desperately. She could take off her apron, walk out the service entrance, disappear into the Manhattan night. Find another restaurant, another name, another life where Christian L. Barron's reach couldn't find her. But her father was in Northwestern Memorial. Room 347. And the experimental rehabilitation program cost $8,400 a week.
There was no running from that.
Judith lifted the plate and pushed through the kitchen doors back into the dining room. The atmosphere had shifted. Conversations were happening in lower voices now, and she could feel eyes tracking her movement across the floor. She was no longer invisible architecture. She was a spectacle. Table 7 came into view. Christian sat with his arm draped across the back of Tracy's chair, the picture of relaxed confidence. But Judith could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his free hand kept clenching and unclenching against his thigh. "Your oysters, sir," Judith said, placing the plate in the precise center of the table. Christian didn't look at the food. He looked at her, his steel eyes calculating something she couldn't read. "Where's my card?" Judith blinked. "I'm sorry. My platinum card." His voice was casual, conversational.
Deadly.
"The one I gave you 15 minutes ago. Where is it?" "It's in my apron, sir. I was going to return it after." "Show me." The request was simple. Reasonable, even. But something in his tone made Judith's blood run cold. She reached into her apron pocket, her fingers searching for the warm metal of the card. Her pocket was empty. Judith's heart stopped. "It was just here. I put it." "You put it where?" Christian's voice rose slightly, just enough for nearby tables to hear. "In your pocket? Or somewhere more permanent?" "Christian," Tracy whispered urgently. "Stop." But Christian was standing now, his chair scraping backward. "I gave this woman my Platinum American Express card out of generosity, out of kindness. And now she's claiming it just vanished." Judith's hands were shaking as she checked her other pocket. Nothing. She patted down her apron, her movements becoming frantic. "Sir, I swear, I put it right." "Victor." Christian's voice boomed across the dining room. "Victor." The floor manager appeared instantly, his face pale. "Mr. Barron, is there a—" "This waitress stole my credit card." Christian's words fell like an executioner's blade. "I gave it to her 15 minutes ago, and now she claims it's gone. I want the police called. Immediately." The dining room erupted. Chairs scraped. Gasps rippled outward like shockwaves. Someone at table 4 pulled out their phone. Whether to call the police or record the scene, Judith couldn't tell. Victor looked like he might vomit. "Mr. Barron, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding." Christian's voice was calm now, terrifyingly calm. "I gave her my card. She took it. Now it's gone. That's called theft." "I didn't steal anything." Judith's voice cracked. "I put it in my pocket. I swear I would never." "Then where is it?" Christian spread his hands, the picture of reasonable concern. "If you didn't take it, where did it go?" Tracy was staring at her fiancé with something like horror dawning in her eyes. "Christian, maybe you just misremembered where you—" "I know exactly where I put it." His gaze never left Judith. "I placed it in her hand. Dozens of people saw me do it. Didn't you?" He addressed this last question to table 6, where the two businessmen shifted uncomfortably but nodded. Victor grabbed Judith's arm. "Miss Higgins, perhaps you should check the kitchen. Maybe it fell." "It didn't fall," Christian interrupted. "She took it. And unless it reappears in the next 60 seconds, I'm calling the police and pressing charges." Judith felt the world tilting. This couldn't be happening. She'd done nothing wrong. She'd put the card in her pocket. She'd felt it there, solid and real, and, oh God. Understanding crashed over her like ice water.
Christian had taken it back.
Somehow, when she'd turned to leave, or when she'd been in the kitchen, or in some moment she couldn't track, he'd orchestrated this. He'd set her up. "You did this," Judith whispered. "You took it out of my pocket. You. Are you accusing me now?" Christian's eyebrows rose. "I've been sitting at this table the entire time. Ask anyone." "He hasn't moved," one of the businessmen confirmed reluctantly. But Judith saw the flicker of satisfaction in Christian's eyes. The tiny curl of his lip that said, "Check." And mate. This was his revenge. Not physical violence, that would be crude. No, Christian L. Barron destroyed people with precision. He was going to have her arrested, get her fired, make sure no reputable restaurant in New York would ever hire her again. And without her income, her father's medical care would stop. Her father would die. The thought hit her like a physical blow, doubling her over. She gripped the edge of table 7 to stay upright. I need that card back, Mr. Barron. Her voice was barely a whisper.
Please.
My father. Should have thought of him before you got sticky fingers. Christian pulled out his phone. Let me make this easy for everyone. 911, right? Sir, please. Victor was practically begging now. Let's just search the restaurant, maybe. Maybe what? Maybe we let thieves walk free? What kind of establishment are you running here, Victor? Tears burned in Judith's eyes. Not from fear, though fear was there, but from the sheer, crushing injustice of watching a man weaponize his power against someone who couldn't fight back. She'd beaten him with language, so he was destroying her with money. Christian's finger hovered over his phone screen, and then a voice cut through the chaos, quiet, measured, and carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. That won't be necessary, Mr. Barron. Everyone turned. An elderly man had risen from table 4. He was unremarkable at first glance. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of understated elegance that spoke of genuine rather than performed wealth. He'd been sitting alone, reading what appeared to be a financial journal, so invisible in his solitude that Judith had served him twice without really seeing him. He was looking at Christian L. Barron the way a surgeon looks at a tumor. And who the hell are you? Christian demanded. The elderly man smiled. It was not a kind smile. My name, he said quietly, is Maximilian Rothwell, and I believe you have something in your left jacket pocket that belongs to you. The name landed like a grenade with a slow fuse. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then recognition rippled through the dining room in waves, a widening of eyes at table 9, a sharp intake of breath from the sommelier station, Victor's face going from pale to sheet white. Maximilian Rothwell. Even Judith, who'd spent 2 years in academic isolation in Paris, knew that name. The Rothwell family didn't just have money, they had the kind of generational wealth that preceded the invention of currency. Maximilian himself chaired a global banking consortium that held debt from 37 countries. Forbes had stopped trying to calculate his net worth after the number exceeded measurable GDP. And this restaurant, the Rothwell Lounge, wasn't just named after his family. He owned it. Christian's face had gone rigid, but he recovered with the quick adaptation of a man used to navigating dangerous waters. Mr. Rothwell, what an unexpected pleasure. I wasn't aware you dined at your own. My left jacket pocket? Christian's hand moved instinctively to his chest. I'm not sure what you're implying, but I'm not implying anything. Maximilian's voice remained conversational, almost pleasant. I'm stating a fact. Your Platinum American Express card, the one you claim this young woman stole, is currently residing in your left inner jacket pocket. You placed it there yourself approximately 4 minutes ago when you pretended to adjust your tie. The dining room went dead silent. Christian's laugh was sharp, defensive. That's absurd. Why would I? Because you're a small man playing at being dangerous, Maximilian said, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. You attempted to humiliate someone you perceived as powerless. She embarrassed you instead. So, you manufactured a crime to destroy her livelihood. It's textbook sadism dressed up as justice. Tracy had gone completely still, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. Check your pocket, Mr. Barron, Maximilian said. Prove me wrong. Christian's jaw clenched. His hand remained pressed against his chest, but he didn't reach inside. Couldn't. Because doing so would either prove Maximilian right or reveal that the old man was lying, and challenging a Rothwell in his own establishment was the kind of mistake people didn't recover from. This is ridiculous, Christian said, but his voice had lost its edge. I don't have to prove anything to Victor. Maximilian's gaze shifted to the floor manager. Call the police. Victor nearly dropped his tablet. Sir, Mr. Barron has accused Miss Higgins of theft. That's a serious criminal allegation. We should have the proper authorities investigate. I'm certain they'd be interested to know whether the allegedly stolen card is, in fact, in Mr. Barron's possession. Filing a false police report is a crime itself, isn't it? Class A misdemeanor in New York. Carries up to a year in prison. Christian's face flushed dark red. You're threatening me? I'm clarifying the stakes. Maximilian removed his wire-rimmed glasses, cleaning them with a silk handkerchief he produced from his vest pocket. You want it to involve law enforcement. I'm simply agreeing with you. Unless, of course, you'd like to check your pocket first. Save everyone the trouble. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Judith watched Christian's face cycle through calculations, rage, fear, desperate strategy. His tattooed neck was blotchy with anger, but his eyes had gone cold and measuring. He was trapped, and he knew it. Slowly, with the mechanical precision of a man defusing a bomb, Christian reached into his left inner jacket pocket. His fingers emerged, holding a Platinum American Express card. The sound that went through the dining room was collective, visceral. Gasps and murmurs, and the hiss of scandal being born. Tracy actually recoiled, her chair scraping backward. The businessmen at table 6 suddenly found their phones very interesting. Christian stared at the card as though it had materialized from another dimension. I didn't. Put it on the table, Maximilian said quietly. Christian's hand trembled as he placed the card on the white tablecloth. Under the chandelier light, Judith could read the name embossed on its surface. Christian L. Barron. How did you? Christian's voice cracked. Someone must have. This is a setup. A setup. Maximilian's tone was clinical. You're suggesting that someone, perhaps Miss Higgins, who was in the kitchen when you discovered your card missing, somehow traveled back in time, stole your card, then planted it in your pocket without you noticing. Is that your official statement? Christian said nothing. His hands were shaking now, actually shaking. Let me offer an alternative narrative, Maximilian continued. You gave Miss Higgins your card as a calculated insult. Then, while she was preparing your order, you had an associate, perhaps someone at table 9, who left rather quickly just now, retrieve it from her apron using sleight of hand. Classic street scam. You then pretended to notice its absence and manufactured a theft allegation to destroy a woman whose only crime was being smarter than you. Table 9 was indeed empty now. Judith hadn't even noticed the departure. Tracy stood up abruptly. I need to use the restroom. Sit down, Miss Smith. Maximilian's words weren't loud, but they carried absolute authority. You're a witness to attempted fraud. You'll stay until this is resolved. Tracy sank back into her chair, tears welling in her perfectly made-up eyes. Christian rallied, desperation sharpening his voice. You have no proof of any of this. It's my word against. Against the security footage? Maximilian gestured toward the discrete cameras positioned throughout the dining room. This establishment has 12 4K cameras with facial recognition and motion tracking. I can have the footage from the last 30 minutes on my tablet in under 2 minutes. Shall we watch it together? See exactly when your friend at table 9 bumped into Miss Higgins near the kitchen doors. The blood drained from Christian's face. Or, Maximilian said, his voice softening into something far more dangerous than anger, we could discuss your outstanding debt with Rothwell Capital Partners. I believe the current figure is $18.3 million across 7 commercial properties and 3 nightclub ventures, all with variable interest rates that adjust quarterly based on your creditworthiness and our assessment of your character. Christian looked like he'd been punched in the throat. Character assessment, Maximilian repeated. It's a fascinating clause in your loan agreements. Allows us to call the entire debt immediately due if we determine you've engaged in behavior that reflects poorly on our institution's values. Fraud, for instance, or conspiracy, or using your business relationships to commit crimes. You can't. Christian's voice was barely a whisper. I can and I will. Maximilian's smile was arctic. Unless you'd like to offer Miss Higgins an apology. A genuine one. Right now. The dining room held its collective breath. Christian L. Barron, who'd built an empire on intimidation, who'd never apologized for anything in his life, sat frozen at table 7 with his platinum card glinting between them like evidence at a crime scene. His mouth opened.
Closed.
His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard Judith thought the marble might crack. And then he did something that shocked everyone, including himself. He stood up, looked Judith directly in the eyes, and said, "I'm sorry." But his eyes, his steel, cold, murderous eyes, said something else entirely. They said, "You're dead." Maximilian Rothwell's office occupied the entire top floor of the building, accessible only by a private elevator that required both a keycard and a retinal scan. Judith stood in that elevator now, her reflection fractured across mirrored walls, trying to understand how the worst night of her life had somehow transformed into this. Christian and Tracy had left 20 minutes ago, Christian walking like a man headed to his own execution, Tracy refusing to even look at him. The dining room had erupted into whispered conversation the moment they disappeared through the mahogany doors. Victor had actually apologized to Judith, his hands shaking as he spoke. But it was Maximilian's quiet request that had stopped her heart. "Miss Higgins, would you join me upstairs? There's something we need to discuss." The elevator doors opened onto an office that looked like a museum had merged with a library. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a glittering view of Manhattan skyline. First-edition books lined custom mahogany shelves. A Rothko hung on the far wall, not a print, the actual canvas. "Please sit." Maximilian gestured to a leather chair positioned across from his desk. Judith sat, her splitting shoes looking even more pathetic against the Persian rug beneath them. Her heart was hammering. People like Maximilian Rothwell didn't invite waitresses to their private offices unless something was very, very wrong. "Am I being fired?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Maximilian's expression softened. "No, Miss Higgins. Quite the opposite." He settled into his own chair, steepling his fingers. "Though I imagine you're wondering why you're here at all." The thought had crossed my mind. "Tell me something," Maximilian said. "Do you remember presenting at the Sorbonne in March of 2022? A symposium on the preservation of endangered Romance dialects." The question hit her like a physical blow. Judith's breath caught. That symposium had been the pinnacle of her academic career, 3 years of research distilled into a 40-minute presentation that had received a standing ovation. She'd been 26 years old and brilliant and absolutely certain that her future was limitless. That was 6 weeks before her father's stroke. "Ah, yes," Judith managed. "I remember. I was there," Maximilian said quietly. "In the back row. I'd flown in specifically to hear you speak after reading your preliminary paper on Occitan grammatical structures. You were." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You were extraordinary. The way you connected linguistic evolution to cultural identity, how you argued that language preservation wasn't about nostalgia, but about maintaining cognitive diversity in human thought. It was the most compelling academic presentation I'd witnessed in 40 years of funding educational initiatives." Judith's hands were trembling. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I tried to find you afterward." Maximilian opened a drawer, extracting a manila folder thick with papers. "I wanted to offer you the directorship of the Rothwell Institute for Cultural Linguistics. We were launching a new program, $50 million in initial funding, offices in 12 countries, full autonomy to shape the curriculum and research agenda. The position came with a salary of $185,000 annually, full benefits, and a research budget of $2 million per year." The numbers made no sense. They were too large, too impossible. Judith stared at the folder like it might detonate. "I had my assistant reach out to your department head at the Sorbonne," Maximilian continued. "She told us you'd withdrawn from the program. Family emergency. No forwarding information. We tried your listed address in Paris. You'd already vacated. Your email bounced. It was as though you'd vanished. My father had a stroke." Judith's voice was barely a whisper. "I had to come home. The medical bills consumed everything," Maximilian finished gently. "I know. I had researchers try to locate you for 18 months. We finally stopped searching last year. I assumed you'd taken a position elsewhere, or perhaps left academia entirely. I never imagined." He gestured toward her uniform. "I never imagined you were here. In my own restaurant. Serving tables. Tears burned behind Judith's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. Why does it matter now? That position, it's been filled, obviously. Someone else got the life I was supposed to have. No one got it, Maximilian said. The position has remained vacant for 2 years. I refuse to settle. The institute has been operating with an interim director, but I've been waiting for the right person.
For you.
The world tilted sideways. That's impossible, Judith whispered. You don't even know if I'm still qualified. I haven't published in 2 years. My research is outdated. I'm not. You corrected Christian Baron's Provençal grammar under extreme duress while working an 11-hour shift in damaged shoes, Maximilian interrupted. You did it with precision and grace and absolutely zero hesitation. Miss Higgins, most of my tenured professors couldn't have done what you did tonight. You haven't lost your brilliance. You've been burying it under necessity. Judith's chest felt like it was caving in. This was too much. Too big. Too impossibly, dangerously close to hope. My father, she managed. He needs constant care. Northwestern Memorial has him in their intensive rehabilitation program, but it costs $8,400 per week, Maximilian said. I know. I made some calls while you were finishing your shift. As of 1 hour ago, your father's medical expenses are fully covered by the Rothwell Medical Trust. Indefinitely. World-class care, no restrictions, no copays. Whatever he needs. The tears came then, hot and fast and unstoppable. Judith pressed her hands over her face, her shoulders shaking with sobs she'd been holding back for 2 years. 2 years of splitting shoes and condescending patrons and watching her father struggle to remember her name. 2 years of her brilliance, withering in the dark while she smiled and poured wine and pretended she was fine. Why, she choked out. Why would you do this for me? Because talent like yours is rare, Maximilian said simply. Because you deserved better than what life gave you. And because I'm a selfish old man who wants to see what you'll accomplish when you're not fighting for survival. Judith lowered her hands, her vision blurry. Maximilian was holding out the folder, the one containing her future, printed on expensive paper with official letterhead. The offer is genuine, he said. Director of the Rothwell Institute for Cultural Linguistics. $185,000 annual salary, full benefits, research autonomy. Start date is flexible. I imagine you'll want time to transition, to see your father, to breathe. But the position is yours if you want it. Judith took the folder with shaking hands. The paper felt heavy.
Real.
Impossible. What's the catch? She whispered. Maximilian's expression turned grave. Christian Baron is a dangerous man, Miss Higgins. I humiliated him tonight in front of his fiancée, his business associates, and half of Manhattan's elite. More importantly, you humiliated him. He won't forget that. Are you saying he'll come after me? I'm saying he'll try. Maximilian leaned forward. The debt leverage I have will keep him at bay for now. But men like Baron don't forgive. They wait. They calculate. And eventually, they strike when you're not looking. Judith's stomach went cold. So what do? You take the position. You move your father to our affiliated care facility in Geneva, the finest neurological rehabilitation center in Europe. You put an ocean between yourself and Christian's reach. And you live the life you were meant to live. It sounded perfect. Too perfect. And if he finds me anyway? Maximilian stood, moving to the window. The Manhattan skyline glittered behind him like a promise or a threat. Then you'll have resources he can't match. Security he can't penetrate. And legal protection that even his connections can't overcome. The Rothwell name carries weight, Miss Higgins. I'm offering to put it between you and anyone who might wish you harm. Judith clutched the folder to her chest. Everything she'd lost was suddenly within reach. Her career, her father's health, her future. But the price was written in Maximilian's careful words. She'd be running, hiding, looking over her shoulder for the rest of her life, waiting for Christian's revenge. How long do I have to decide? She asked. The offer expires in 72 hours, Maximilian said. After that, I'll need to move forward with other candidates. I've waited 2 years, Miss Higgins. I can't wait forever. Judith stood on shaking legs, the folder clutched against her chest like a shield. I need to see my father.
Talk to him.
He can't make decisions for himself anymore, but I need him to know what's happening. Of course. Maximilian handed her a business card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. My private number. Call anytime. Judith took it, her mind spinning. She turned toward the elevator, then stopped. Mr. Rothwell? Thank you. For tonight. For everything. I don't know how to. You already thanked me, he said gently. When you refused to let Christian Barron erase you. That took more courage than most people possess. The elevator doors closed on Maximilian's kind smile. Judith sagged against the mirrored wall, exhaustion and adrenaline warring in her veins. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, then thought better of it. Maybe it was the hospital. Maybe her father had. She swiped to accept the call. Heavy breathing filled the line. Then a voice, low and poisonous. You should have stayed invisible. The call disconnected. Judith's hands went numb. The folder slipped from her fingers, scattering papers across the elevator floor. Christian Barron knew her phone number. And he was already hunting. The morning light in Geneva was different, softer somehow, filtered through alpine air that smelled of snow and possibility rather than desperation. Judith stood at the window of her father's private suite at the Rothwell Neurological Center, watching Lake Geneva shimmer beneath October sun. 6 months. 6 months since Christian's voice had turned her blood to ice in that elevator. 6 months since she'd boarded a plane with her father strapped to a medical gurney, fleeing across an ocean from a man whose silence terrified her more than his threats ever could. Because Christian had gone silent. No more calls. No messages. No attempts at contact that Maximilian's security team could trace. It was the quiet of a predator watching from tall grass, and it made Judith check locks twice and scan crowded streets for tattooed necks and steel-cold eyes. But her father was walking again. Not perfectly. His left side still dragged slightly, his hand trembled when he reached for things. But he was walking. The doctors called it miraculous. Judith called it expensive. $47,000 per week for treatment that rewired neural pathways and rebuilt muscle memory from ash. Maximilian had paid every cent without blinking.
Jude.
The voice was rough, unpracticed, but unmistakable. Judith spun from the window. Her father sat upright in the therapeutic chair, his eyes clear and focused in a way they hadn't been since the stroke. He was looking directly at her, actually seeing her. Jude, he repeated, and the word came out stronger this time. My Jude. The sob that tore from Judith's throat was primal. She crossed the room in 3 strides, falling to her knees beside his chair. His right hand, the strong one, lifted to touch her face, his thumb brushing away tears she didn't know she was crying. You disappeared, he managed. Each word was labor, but he pushed through. Thought I'd lost you. I'm here, Dad. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. His smile was crooked but genuine. Good. Because have to tell you something. Judith's heart clenched. What is it? Are you in pain? Should I call? Man came, her father said. 2 weeks ago. When you were in Paris. For your lecture. The room temperature dropped 20 degrees. What man? Judith's voice came out strangled. Tattoos. Neck. Said he was old friend. Her father's eyes darkened with memory. Wanted to know when you'd be back. No.
No.
Dad, what did you tell him? Nothing. Her father's hand tightened on hers. Told him didn't know you.
Nurses came. He left.
But Jude. His eyes met hers, suddenly sharp with the intelligence that had raised her, that had taught her to value truth above comfort. He'll come back. Judith's phone buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. Her hands shook as she pulled it out. The screen showed a single image, her father's suite. This suite. Photographed from outside the window. From across the lake. The message that followed was 3 words. Geneva looks lovely. Judith's vision tunneled. The folder for Maximilian, the job, the ocean between her and Christian, none of it had mattered. He'd found her anyway, had been watching, waiting, and now he wanted her to know there was nowhere she could run that his reach couldn't follow. Her father squeezed her hand.
Jude.
Whatever's happening, you don't face it alone. Not anymore. But as Judith stared at that photograph, at the proof that Christian Barron had turned her sanctuary into his hunting ground, she understood with crushing clarity. She'd won the battle in the Rothwell Lounge. But the war had only just begun. If you want to know what happens when Judith stops running and starts fighting back, when the woman who survived the Sorbonne decides to teach a mobster what real power looks like, then you need to follow for part 2. Because Christian Barron made one fatal mistake. He thought breaking her would be easy. He was wrong.
Subscribe now.
Some stories don't end. They ignite. Thank you for being here. For bearing witness. For refusing to let voices like Judith's be silenced. This is just the beginning.